Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another RedGamingTech.com video. I am Crimson Rain, and I will be talking to you about Xbox Live, and specifically now the fact that XNA development has been cancelled, what the development plans are for smaller indie developers, and what they'll be doing in regards to Xbox Live. Now, there have been a couple of blows actually against the indie development, and by indie I mean very small developers producing games for Xbox Live. The first would be Microsoft ceasing a development of XNA. This was confirmed on February of this year, and it has no plans to constantly update or indeed support them. Now bear in mind that XNA is used to develop for several things. One would be the Xbox 360, one would be Windows, and the other one would of course be Windows phones. The next smack on the head would come from Nat Brown, who is one of the co-creators of the original Xbox, and he's criticised Microsoft from what he sees as the primary problem of Xbox 360, and he says that that's a lack of functional and growing platform ecosystem for small developers. Now, before we go too far into this with the Xbox 360, let's talk about small developers generally speaking. The thing with small development is you never know when your game is going to be an absolutely hugely successful and big title. Now, a fantastic example of this actually would be Terraria, and funnily enough it was actually developed using Microsoft's XNA framework, and of course was released back in the mists of 2011, May the 16th if you want me to be exact of course, and has been fairly damn popular on the PC. On its first day of release, it's sold around 50,000 copies, and over that 1 week has sold 200,000 copies, and well, from 2013 January, it's sold 2 million copies total, and has now been announced to be coming over to the PlayStation Network and of course Xbox Live Arcade. My point being that who knew that a game with such humble beginnings was going to be so bloody popular? The same thing could be said for Minecraft and dozens of other indie games. What generally happens, of course, is that studios strike it lucky. After all, you can never really be exactly sure what's going to be a success if you're an indie developer. Sure, if you're Electronic Arts and you're producing a game like, let's go with Crisis 3, you know it's going to sell well. Even Alien Colonial Marines, they probably knew it was going to at least recuperate most of the money that they spent developing it, or at least that's the the hope. I'm not actually sure about Alien Colonial Marines sales figures. Hopefully they're pretty damn dire, if I'm honest. Regardless of the fact, you don't really know how well an indie game is going to sell. It depends obviously on the hype, how fun it is, what system specifications, and dozens of other things. My point being, however, the indie development does go a long way onto making a certain platform very popular. For example, Steam, especially now Steam has the green light, which of course really helps indie developers. Now, it's worth noting that many feel that the indie game slot on the marketplace right now has been diminished and kind of sidelined with each and every dashboard update. And though Microsoft may yet surprise us by releasing something such as, say, Apple's App Store, it's not really thought to be on the cards right now. Most people in the XNA development community are figuring that no, it's not really going to happen. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean or preclude the fact that Microsoft will release an updated version or maybe a completely different tool set now that Xbox 720, of course, is fairly far into development. Now, there are a couple of questions that you should ask yourself. Will it actually be missed? Now, bear in mind that the problem with these small indie games developers is that often you can have completely and utterly useless games on the system. For example, you can have complete clones of smaller games or titles that say make your avatar fart. In other words, not really anything to be missed. There's not anything unique. There's no hidden gem there. But on the other hand, that's not necessarily the end of it. There were some indie developers who made the Xbox Live marketplace their foundation, the cornerstone of their business model. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the titles on Xbox Live will sell as well as the PC counterpart. Some titles, for example, Breath of Death and Cthulhu Save the World, sold okay on the consoles. They were more of a it helps the developer rather than it makes the developer. On the other hand, Steam definitely did a lot better. Now, even developers who are regular on to the indie kind of development scene for Xbox Live have admitted that there were a massive amount of crappy games. But another counter argument to that would be, unfortunately, that's just how it works with a relatively open development system. For example, if you have an Android or an Apple phone, if you were to take a gander at the various titles offered there, you'll notice that they're pretty damn shocking, at least for the most part. I mean, yes, sure, there are some excellent games there. There are titles like Temple Run, but then there are also those other games that are blatant rip-offs of big titles, or simply games where if you don't really pay money, ultimately you can't progress far enough, which is an entirely different argument I'm not really going to get into on this particular video. My point being that you're always going to have to kind of sift through the crap. Unfortunately, you also have to do that with main big name titles as well. For example, Alien Colonial Marines. I know I'm going to be using that title for a while, so get used to it for 2013. It's going to take a lot for me to forgive that one. Regardless, my point being that you're always going to get crappy games. Now, if you happen to buy those big games, it's certainly going to cost you a lot of money. So, is it wise for Microsoft to start kind of pushing away those indie developers? Is it wise for them not to be supporting them so much? Now, the problem with PC gaming is it's not all fun and games either. Despite what people think, developing for a PC can be really difficult. Now, one of the issues is with PC gaming, really you have to be put on Steam or something to really sell well. Why? Because most people don't start trolling through like millions of different websites to kind of look through, hidden gems. If on the other hand you're on Steam, there's a good chance that if you're a PC gamer, you have Steam installed. And unfortunately, getting through the green light process of Steam, it's even more difficult. So what's next for them? I mean, let's say you're a small indie developer, and for all I know, there's a possibility that you are, and if you are, I'd love you to contact me. Maybe we can arrange an interview or something. And let's say you're a small indie developer and you've been putting titles on the Xbox Live marketplace for a while now, and people of course buy your products, and let's say that your titles are fairly decent and you're making an okay living. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're living the high life, but you're making enough of a salary to be able to get by. Well, there are a couple of options. Firstly, Microsoft have not said that they're gonna, cancel it. They haven't said that, hey, you know what, we're gonna remove this and not be able to, and you won't be able to buy the games. Ultimately, Microsoft are still getting a small cut of this. The second thing is that it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't support it with Xbox 720. It's just not really been confirmed yet, and they certainly don't really seem to be that active in the development of it. Now, remember, they've already been criticised for this by Nat Brown before, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to fix it. The problem with, any company is it takes a while for their policies to change. But let's just for a moment assume that Microsoft don't do this. What's actually what's really left for them? Well, it's possible that, say, Sony will make it even easier to develop for the PlayStation. Now, the good news is, if you're up to date with the PS4 news, you'll know that since the Xbox 720 and PS4 are using a much more simpler CPU architecture, it's going to be a lot easier to port games to and from PC. In other words, if you develop a game for the PC, you can fairly easily make it work on for example, the PS4. Obviously, there are going to be some limitations, but most of the time anyway, indie games don't really exactly push the boundaries of what the system's capable of. I mean, obviously there might be the odd exception here and there, but if you were to say take a look at Breath of Death, it's not really going to look amazing, is it? The next would be PC development. As I've already mentioned, the problem with PC development is it's not necessarily a massive treasure trove of money. It really depends on just how much of a kind of impact you can make, and this is obviously from trailers. If your game's visually impressive, that certainly helped, or if the game's innovative. On the other hand, some innovative titles don't necessarily translate well to trailers. There's also, of course, the can I get it on Steam or a similar, a similar platform. Even having it included on something like the Humble Bundle does help notoriety's sake. As well, of course, of having it reviewed on channels and websites. For example, I've actually been offered several free copies of games before, indie titles, because people want, and by people I mean the developers, want their games showcased, and my videos will then be showcased on their Facebook, and they encourage me to share it and so forth. And that's fine. I like doing it, to be honest. I think it's a really great service for me, for the games developers, for me to actually show off their games. Hey, let's say for example you've not seen a particular title, you might see it on my channel if you're a subscriber, or you just randomly are searching on the YouTube and it's a suggested video or whatever, and you see that title and think, actually, you know what, it doesn't look too bad, I think I'll check it out myself. The thing is, though, with a game like, say, Dead Pixels, which is on Steam right now, of course, and I've actually done a video of it, it's very easy to play, it's cheap, it's fun, but more to the point, it was priced at a point where it's an impulse purchase, and I just bought it and actually did a video on it for you guys. So apart from Steam, the other major option, of course, for developers would be something like iOS or Android. That doesn't necessarily mean that they may want to go that route, however. Now bear in mind, we've also got the Ouya coming out fairly soon also. The Ouya, of course, is based on an Android operating system, and because of this, it's going to have an access to quite a decent selection of games. Moreover, it's going to mean that if it sells reasonably well, and it has a reasonable consumer base, that at least developers have kind of another option to develop games on. Now, why do I care so much about indie developers, the small ones? Well, there's a very simple reason behind it, actually. Generally speaking, as I've said before, you don't know which of those indie developers is going to create a surprise hit. In other words, a game that you just thought, really didn't expect this to be good. And sometimes you can have quite a bit of fun with the small indie games. I mean, generally speaking, who knew that Terraria was going to last for so long and be so bloody popular? Now, even if the indie company doesn't actually really become massive, what it does do is it allows those designers, those developers, those programmers and so on to get jobs in the industry. It gives them experience and allows other companies, for example Electronic Arts, Ubisoft and so forth, to say, hey, you know what, this is a pretty good idea, or that franchise might be snapped up and so forth. In other words, it adds extra creativity and new ideas to the gaming industry. And I believe what the criticism of the current Xbox has been is that they haven't really fueled that. Sure, you've got Netflix, sure, you've got all these other things, but really, you need to say, hey, we need other indie developers, we need to support these developers, we need them to produce games on our console, especially if the games turn out to be good and turn out to be exclusive to that console. Sure, let's say I'm an indie developer and I produce a game, and let's even go as far as to say that game's pretty bloody good. On the other hand, it might not necessarily mean that you, as a PlayStation owner, are going to really care. You might think to yourself, well, you know what, it looks pretty fun and stuff, and when I played it around my buddy Mark's house, it was alright, it wasn't too bad, but I'm not exactly going to buy a console over it. On the other hand, it does mean that if you're an owner of the Xbox, or you're not sure which system to go for, seeing that you've actually got a healthy community there really does help. Funnily enough, actually, one of the major criticisms with PC gaming is actually Steam. Now, as much as I absolutely love Steam, apart from at Christmas time or any other sales time, and then I try to hide my wallet before the nasty Steam sale comes and rapes it, well, the only problem with it is it does have quite a bit of control over the PC gaming marketplace. Now, while I do understand that this is good in some respects, it's good to have kind of a solid base to work on. If you don't have any base whatsoever and everything's kind of up in the air and you don't have any friends list and so on, it doesn't really work. So Steam in that respect has helped to tie the community together, as well as of course now you have Origin and other things, which, to be honest with you, I'm not a massive Origin fan, but that's a different story. But my point being that it also does mean that Steam has quite a lot of hold on games and just how well they do sell. So I think everyone right now, and this would include gamers, this would include developers and so on, would love to see a really, really good indie support platform for the next generation Xbox. And of course PS4 and so on as well, that goes without saying, but I'm primarily focusing of course on the Xbox 720 on this video. I think people would absolutely love it. They would love Microsoft to be very supportive. Now, to be fair to the PlayStation 4 development team and Sony as a general whole, from what I've been reading about the PS4, and you guys know that I've been doing a lot of PS4 stuff on this channel, and of course I'll be covering the Xbox 720 just as feverishly. But what I have been hearing quite consistently is that Sony are very supportive of the developers. Now, there are numerous reasons behind this. One of them, of course, would be that they simply are the first onto the market and they wanted the games to look pretty darn impressive. The second reason, of course, was that Sony weren't so supportive, at least early on for the PS3, in terms of the hardware was a lot bloody harder to program for. This is bad for an indie developer. It's bad. If you're got a very limited budget, you don't really have excellent support anyway, because, well, the company's not really giving you many tools. It's kind of an uphill struggle to release titles on the system, even if they've got a decent distribution network that's willing to accept the games. Quite simply put, if I can't figure out how the hell to do a function on the processor, and the programming interface is not exactly intuitive, more to the point, I can call up the company and they're just going to say, well, you kind of have to just type a few buttons and you'll be okay, pal, and that's it. It's not really going to help me release a game onto the platform, is it? I can have all the good faith in the world and they can give me 99.9% of the distributed profit. It just doesn't help me. On the other hand, if, for example, the company says, hey, here's a great pamphlet, here's a very decent, intuitive programming language, very easy to use hardware, very accessible, and we've also got a great line of support as well for you guys. It just helps. It helps to produce the games of a lot better quality, a lot quicker, by the way. It helps to produce bigger games, and more to the point, there's buggy games. Moreover, of course, it also means that the game titles can be cheaper. One of the reasons for this, of course, is, let's say, for example, I have to hire 3 extra people to help me develop a game because I need a programmer to, specialize in one certain thing because I can't figure out how to do the functions. I'm not much of a programmer anyway, I'll just be honest. But even let's say I was, but I need a specific programmer to help me with one thing. I use this as a silly example. And, I can't figure it out myself, so I hire a programmer to do it. That's cost. And so obviously I need to offset that. So here's hoping that Microsoft really pull their finger out and really push the platform a lot harder. Now, some developers do believe that Microsoft will continue it. One of the arguments for this would be Windows 8. They do somewhat support, of course, an open marketplace, and obviously that's kudos to Microsoft for that. Now, other people have criticized a Windows 8 marketplace for numerous reasons, including Steam, by the way, but to be honest with you, of course they're going to criticize it. They're not really going to want to lose, I wouldn't say exclusive, but at least so much prominence on the distribution. So what is this? Is this video doom and gloom, or is it, what? Well, in my opinion, it's just kind of trying to highlight the importance of small indie development, and that we as consumers don't want it to go, and that Microsoft should and hopefully will continue to support it. Regardless of which, I'm gonna get going. I'm pretty bloody tired. I slept awfully. I've been to the gym, and so I still need to edit, as it always is. So take care of yourselves. Bye for now, and have a great evening or afternoon or morning or whatever the hell time it is for you.